The morning sun cast long shadows across the Dallas suburbs as Alex Brennan loaded his van with electrical supplies. At 54, his weathered hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades mastering his craft. His graying hair was cut short, practical rather than stylish, and his blue work shirt bore the faded logo of Brennan Electric Services, a one-man operation that had kept him busy for the past 15 years. Most people who knew Alex saw him as exactly what he appeared to be: a reliable electrician who showed up on time, did quality work, and kept his prices fair. He was the kind of man neighbors called when their power went out, who knew every circuit breaker in half the houses in Oak Cliff, and who could diagnose electrical problems by the sound they made. What they didn't know was that Alex Brennan had once been Captain Alexander Brennan, United States Air Force, with over 3,000 flight hours in helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft. They didn't know about the missions he'd flown in places that didn't appear on most maps, or the commendations gathering dust in a box at the back of his bedroom closet. That life had ended 20 years ago with a single, devastating moment that changed everything. Now, Alex preferred the predictable rhythm of electrical work. Problems that could be solved with the right tools and enough patience. No lives depending on split-second decisions. No consequences that kept him awake at night. His phone buzzed as he secured a ladder to the van's roof rack. The display showed Westfield Mall maintenance. "Brennan Electric," he answered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Alex? This is Tom Rodriguez at Westfield. We've got a situation with the main electrical panel in the north wing. Started flickering around 6 this morning, and now half the food court is without power. Can you get here?" Alex glanced at his watch. 8:30 a.m. on a Saturday. The mall would be getting busy soon. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to Westfield Shopping Center took him through neighborhoods where he'd grown up, past the elementary school where his daughter Sarah had played on the playground before the divorce, before she and her mother moved to Seattle. Those were memories Alex tried not to dwell on, but they surfaced anyway during quiet moments like these. The mall's parking lot was already filling with early shoppers, families with children heading to the toy stores, and teenagers meeting friends for a day of browsing. Alex parked near the maintenance entrance and gathered his tools, nodding to security guard Miguel Santos, who'd worked there for as long as Alex had been handling the mall's electrical issues. "Morning, Miguel. How's the family?" "Good, good. Maria's starting her sophomore year at UNT next week. Says she wants to be an engineer like her old man wanted to be." Miguel grinned, pride evident in his voice. "She's got the brains for it," Alex said, meaning it. He'd watched Miguel's daughter grow up during his regular visits to the mall, had seen her helping her father during school breaks and summer vacations. Tom Rodriguez met Alex at the maintenance office, looking frazzled. As the mall's facilities manager, Tom took infrastructure problems personally, especially on busy weekends when thousands of people depended on everything working perfectly. "It started small," Tom explained as they walked toward the electrical room. "Just a few lights flickering in the food court, but it's gotten worse in the past hour. I'm worried we might have to shut down the entire north wing if we can't figure this out." The electrical room was located in the basement level, accessible through a series of service corridors that most shoppers never knew existed. Alex had been here dozens of times over the years, upgrading systems, replacing aging components, and troubleshooting problems that ranged from simple to complex. The main panel was a substantial piece of equipment, controlling power distribution for roughly a third of the mall's retail space. As Alex opened his toolkit and began his investigation, he could hear the distant sounds of Saturday morning activity. Children's voices, the rumble of escalators, the generic background music that played throughout the shopping areas. "Looks like we've got some serious corrosion on the main bus bars," Alex told Tom after examining the panel's internal components. "This didn't happen overnight. The connections have been deteriorating for months, maybe years. Can you fix it? Alex studied the problem with the methodical approach that had served him well in both his careers, military and civilian. The corrosion was extensive, affecting multiple connection points. It would require replacing several major components, a job that would take most of the day. I can fix it, but it's going to take time. 6 to 8 hours minimum. And I'll need to shut down power to the entire north wing while I work. Tom winced. Saturday afternoon without power to 30 stores? That's going to cost the mall a lot of money. The alternative is a potential fire hazard, Alex replied. These connections could fail catastrophically at any time. You don't want that kind of risk with thousands of people in the building. It was a conversation they'd had before, in various forms. Alex had learned long ago that safety sometimes required difficult decisions, choices that prioritized long-term well-being over short-term convenience. Tom Rodriguez was a good man who understood this, even when it made his job harder. Okay, Tom said. Let me make some calls, notify the affected stores. When can you start? Give me 30 minutes to get the right parts from my van. I'll begin the shutdown at 9:30. As Alex climbed the stairs back to ground level, he passed a group of teenagers heading down to the service level, probably taking a shortcut to the movie theater. They barely glanced at the middle-aged electrician with his toolkit, seeing only another maintenance worker going about his routine business. If they had looked more closely, they might have noticed the way Alex carried himself, the unconscious military bearing that 20 years in civilian life hadn't completely erased. They might have seen how his eyes automatically scanned his surroundings, noting exits and potential hazards with the reflexive awareness of someone trained to assess tactical situations. But they were focused on their own concerns, weekend plans, social dynamics, the 1,000 small dramas that defined teenage life. Alex was invisible to them, just another adult in the background of their world. He preferred it that way. The replacement parts Alex needed were standard components that any electrical supply house would carry, but he kept a well-stocked van for exactly these situations. Over the years, he'd learned that emergency repairs often happened at the worst possible times: weekends, holidays, late nights when supply stores were closed. As he sorted through his inventory, Alex noticed increased activity in the mall's parking lot. More families arriving, more cars circling for parking spots. Saturday at Westfield was always busy, but today seemed particularly crowded. Some kind of special event, maybe, or just the usual weekend rush, intensified by good weather and back-to-school shopping. His phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the display, and Alex felt the familiar mixture of joy and melancholy that accompanied calls from his daughter. Hi, sweetheart. How's Seattle treating you? Good, Dad. Busy with work, but good. I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing. Sarah was 28 now, a successful architect with her own apartment and a life that didn't require regular input from her father. But she called every Saturday morning, a routine they'd maintained since the divorce 15 years ago. I'm fine. Working at the mall today? Electrical problems. Nothing exciting. Alex leaned against his van, enjoying the sound of his daughter's voice. How's the Morrison project coming along? They talked for 10 minutes about her work designing a sustainable housing development, about her boyfriend David, who Alex had met twice and approved of, about small details of life that parents and adult children share to stay connected across the miles. Dad, Sarah said as the conversation wound down, I've been thinking about coming to Dallas for Christmas this year. If that's okay with you? More than okay. I'd love that. Good. I miss you, Dad. I know we don't talk about why you left the military, why you became an electrician instead of staying with aviation. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. For building a new life. For being there when I needed you during the divorce and after. Alex felt his throat tighten. Sarah had been 12 when his military career ended, old enough to understand that something significant had happened, but too young to grasp the full implications. She'd watched him struggle with the transition, seen him rebuild his identity around a completely different set of skills and priorities. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know. After they ended the call, Alex stood in the parking lot for a moment longer, watching families head toward the mall entrance. Children tugged at their parents' hands, excited about toy stores and video games. Teenagers clustered in groups, using the mall as a social gathering place. Elderly couples walked slowly, treating their shopping expedition as a form of gentle exercise and entertainment. All of them trusting that the infrastructure around them would work properly, that the lights would stay on and the escalators would function and the building would remain safe. It was the kind of background confidence that most people never thought about. The assumption that someone, somewhere, was taking care of the details that kept modern life functioning smoothly. Alex gathered his tools and headed back into the mall. Time to get to work. The power shutdown went smoothly. Alex had coordinated with Tom Rodriguez to notify all affected stores, and mall security had posted signs explaining the temporary outage. A few shop managers complained about lost sales, but most understood that electrical safety couldn't be compromised. Working alone in the basement electrical room, Alex began the methodical process of replacing corroded components. It was detailed, demanding work that required complete attention. Exactly the kind of problem-solving he found satisfying after 2 decades of practice. The old bus bars came out with significant effort, their copper surfaces green with corrosion and pitted from years of electrical stress. Alex photographed the damage for his records, then began installing the replacement components with the precision that had made his reputation in the Dallas area. As he worked, he could hear the muffled sounds of mall activity continuing above him. Even with 30 stores temporarily without power, Westfield remained busy. The main corridors still had electricity. The central court area continued operating normally, and shoppers adapted by visiting unaffected areas or simply waiting for the repairs to be completed. Around noon, Alex paused for lunch, eating a sandwich from his cooler while reviewing the progress he'd made. The job was proceeding smoothly, ahead of schedule if anything. He might be able to restore power by mid-afternoon rather than evening. His phone buzzed with a text message from Miguel Santos. "Everything going well up here. No problems with the shutdown. Thanks for the professional work." Alex smiled and returned to his task. The new bus bars were precisely engineered components, designed to handle the electrical loads of modern commercial buildings with multiple safety margins built in. Installing them correctly required patience and attention to detail, but the work itself was straightforward for someone with Alex's experience. He was making the final connections on the main panel when he heard something unusual. A sound that didn't belong to the normal background noise of a shopping mall on a Saturday afternoon. Shouting, not the playful voices of children or the excited chatter of teenagers, but adult voices raised in alarm, and underneath that, something else. A sound that Alex recognized from his military days, though it took a moment for his mind to process what he was hearing. Gunshots. Alex froze, his hands still holding the electrical connections he'd been tightening. For a few seconds, he tried to convince himself he'd been mistaken. Car backfiring in the parking lot, maybe. Construction noise from a nearby building project. But the shouting was getting louder and more distinct. People screaming, running. The unmistakable sounds of panic and chaos. Alex set down his tools and moved to the electrical room's door, listening intently. The mall's basement level was insulated from most noise, but he could hear enough to know that something was seriously wrong upstairs. His first instinct was to call 911, but as he reached for his phone, it rang. Tom Rodriguez's name on the display. Alex! Tom's voice was strained, frightened. Are you still in the basement? Yes. Tom, what's happening up there? Shots fired in the main court area. Multiple shooters, I think. Mall security has initiated lockdown procedures, but... Tom's voice broke up, the call cutting in and out. People trapped, can't get out, need help. The line went dead. Alex stood in the silence of the electrical room, his mind racing. 20 years ago, he would have known exactly what to do. 20 years ago, he'd been trained for crisis situations, equipped with the skills and authority to take decisive action when lives were at stake. But that was a different life, a different person. Now he was just an electrician, a middle-aged civilian with no official role in emergency response. The smart thing to do would be to stay put. Let the professionals handle the situation, wait for law enforcement to secure the building. That's what Alex Brennan, the electrician, would do. But Captain Alexander Brennan, the man who'd spent 20 years in military service before a single tragic moment changed everything. That man was still there, buried under years of civilian routine, but not forgotten. And that man knew that sometimes waiting for professionals meant watching people die who might have been saved. Alex looked at his toolbox, then at the electrical panel he'd been working on. The mall's north wing still didn't have power. 30 stores remained dark, their emergency lighting providing minimal illumination. If people were trying to escape through those areas, they'd be moving through near total darkness. But he could fix that. He could restore power to the north wing in minutes if he bypassed the safety procedures and brought the system online before completing all the connection work. It would be risky. There was still a chance of electrical faults, but it would give people light to see by as they tried to reach safety. Alex made his decision. He grabbed his tools and began working with a speed and efficiency that came from muscle memory, from years of training that had taught him to function under pressure when lives were at stake. The connections weren't perfect, but they would hold long enough. Alex threw the main breaker, and the electrical panel hummed back to life. Somewhere above him, lights came on in 30 stores that had been dark since morning. Then, he did something that Alex Brennan, the electrician, would never have done. He opened his toolbox and pulled out an item that most people would have found strange for an electrical contractor to carry. A small tactical flashlight, military grade, the kind designed for combat operations. Next to it was something even more unusual, a compact first aid kit, not the basic supplies that most tradesmen carried, but a trauma kit designed for treating serious injuries under field conditions. 20 years ago, these items had been standard equipment. Alex had kept carrying them out of habit, telling himself it was just basic preparedness, that any responsible person should be equipped for emergencies. Now, for the first time in 2 decades, he was going to find out if he remembered how to use them. The stairwell leading from the basement to the main level had never seemed so long. Alex climbed steadily, his tactical flashlight in one hand and the trauma kit slung over his shoulder. Each step brought the sounds of chaos closer, screaming, shouting, the occasional sharp crack of gunfire. At the door to the main level, Alex paused and listened. The sounds seemed to be coming from multiple directions, which suggested either several shooters or a single attacker who was moving through the mall systematically. Either scenario was bad, but multiple shooters would be exponentially worse. Alex cracked the door open and peered into the service corridor that connected to the main shopping areas. The hallway was empty, but he could see emergency lighting flashing and hear the mall's automated announcement system repeating the same message. Please evacuate the building immediately. Use the nearest exit. This is not a drill. The announcement was being largely ignored, Alex realized, because many people couldn't reach the nearest exits. The shooting had started in the central court area, effectively trapping shoppers in the wings and outlying stores. Standard evacuation procedures assumed clear egress routes, but those routes had been compromised. Alex moved into the corridor, staying low and keeping to the shadows. His mind automatically began processing the tactical situation, habits from his military training overriding 20 years of civilian routine. Where were the shooters? How many people were trapped? What resources were available? The first resource was knowledge. Alex knew this building better than almost anyone, except possibly Tom Rodriguez. He'd been working on Westfield's electrical systems for 15 years, had crawled through service areas and maintenance shafts that most people didn't know existed. He understood the mall's layout, its hidden passages, and its structural vulnerabilities. The second resource was mobility. While shoppers were trapped in stores or hiding behind counters, Alex could move through the service areas relatively safely. He could reach locations that others couldn't, assess situations from different angles. The third resource was communication. His phone still worked, and he had Tom Rodriguez's number, along with several other mall employees. If the mall's internal communication systems were compromised, he might be able to coordinate rescue efforts using personal devices. Alex reached a service door that opened near the North Wing's main corridor. Through the small window, he could see people huddled in storefronts, many of them clearly terrified. Some were trying to call for help on their phones, others were simply frozen with fear. The lights were working now, thanks to his emergency repair of the electrical panel. At least people could see, could navigate without stumbling in darkness. But they were still trapped, afraid to venture into the open corridors where they might encounter the shooters. Alex's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Dad, seeing news about shooting at Dallas Mall. Are you okay? Please respond. Sarah." His daughter had seen news coverage, which meant the situation was already being reported, which meant law enforcement response was probably underway. But it also meant Sarah was worried about him, afraid that he might be in danger. Alex typed back quickly, "Safe, in secure area. Love you." It wasn't entirely true, but it would have to do. Sarah didn't need to know that her father was moving toward danger instead of away from it. Another text arrived, this one from Miguel Santos. "Alex, if you're still in building, shooter in main court. I'm in security office. Several people injured. Can't reach them." Alex felt a chill. Miguel was a good man, a friend. If he was trapped in the security office, it meant the situation near the central court was very bad indeed. Alex moved deeper into the service corridors, heading toward the security office. Along the way, he began to encounter signs of the chaos above. Debris that had fallen through vents, the sound of people crying, occasional shouts for help from areas he couldn't immediately reach. The security office was located on the mezzanine level, accessible through a service stairway that most shoppers didn't know about. Alex climbed carefully, testing each step for stability and listening for sounds that might indicate danger. Miguel Santos was indeed trapped in the security office, along with two other mall employees, Janet from the information desk and Kevin, one of the younger security guards. They had multiple monitors showing different areas of the mall, and the images were disturbing. Bodies in the central court, people hiding behind planters and benches, stores with their security gates pulled down, shoppers trapped inside. "Alex?" Miguel looked both relieved and surprised to see him. "How did you get here?" "We thought everyone in the building was either evacuated or hiding." "Service corridors," Alex replied, studying the monitor displays. "What's the situation?" Kevin, the young security guard, was pale and shaking. "Two shooters, maybe three. They started in the central court about 20 minutes ago. We've lost contact with mall management, and 911 operators say police response is delayed because of another incident across town. Delayed how long? At least another 15 minutes, maybe more. Alex felt his jaw tighten. 15 minutes was a lifetime in a situation like this. People would die while waiting for professional help to arrive. On the monitors, he could see areas where injured people were lying motionless while others tried to help them. He could see families huddled together, parents shielding children, elderly shoppers who had been knocked down and couldn't get up. "Miguel," Alex said, "do you have access to the mall's public address system from here?" "Yes, but what good would that do?" The automated evacuation message is already playing. Alex studied the monitor displays more carefully, analyzing the patterns of movement and the locations where people were trapped. An idea was forming based on his knowledge of the building's layout and the tactical principles he'd learned 2 decades earlier. "I need you to turn off the automated message. I'm going to give people specific evacuation instructions, area by area." Miguel looked skeptical. "Alex, no offense, but you're an electrician. This kind of situation, maybe we should wait for the professionals." "Miguel, I need you to trust me." Alex's voice carried an authority that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. "People are dying while we wait. I know this building better than anyone, and I can guide them to safety if you'll help me." There was something in Alex's tone, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before, that made Miguel nod and reach for the public address controls. "Okay," Miguel said. "What do you want me to do?" Alex took the microphone, looking at the monitors that showed trapped shoppers throughout the building. For a moment, he was transported back 20 years, to a different crisis, a different set of people depending on his decisions. This time, he told himself, things would be different. This time, everyone would make it home. "Attention shoppers and mall employees," Alex's voice echoed through Westfield's speakers, calm and authoritative. "This is Alex Brennan, coordinating evacuation efforts. I need everyone to listen carefully to specific instructions for your location." The change in tone from the automated messages was immediate. On the security monitors, Alex could see people stopping, turning toward the speakers, focusing on his words instead of panicking. North Wing stores, Spencer's, GameStop, Radio Shack, and adjacent shops. You now have full power and lighting. Exit through the service corridor behind Spencer's. There's an emergency exit that leads directly to the north parking lot. Move in groups, stay low, help anyone who needs assistance. Alex watched the monitors as people began moving, following his directions. The service corridor he'd mentioned was one that most shoppers didn't know about, but it provided a direct route to safety without passing through the main court area where the shooting had occurred. South Wing, Barnes & Noble, Brookstone, and surrounding stores. You have a clear path to the emergency exits near the movie theater. Stay together, move quickly, but don't run. Help is coming. Miguel was staring at Alex with growing amazement. "How do you know all these routes?" "I've been working security here for 8 years, and I didn't know about half of these passages." Alex continued coordinating the evacuation, area by area, using his knowledge of the mall's layout to guide people to safety through routes that bypassed the central danger zone. But even as he worked, he could see on the monitors that there were still people trapped in the central court area, injured, unable to move, completely exposed. "Miguel, I need to get to the central court." "Alex, no, that's where the shooters are. It's suicide." "People are injured down there. They can't move on their own." Alex studied the monitor displays, calculating distances and cover options. "Look at camera 7. There's an elderly woman behind the planter near the fountain. She's been there for 20 minutes. She's either injured or too scared to move." "Wait for the police. They'll handle rescue operations." "In 15 minutes, that woman might be dead." Alex looked around the security office, noting the equipment available. Standard security gear, nothing that would help in a tactical situation. But there was something else, something he'd noticed earlier, but not fully processed. Miguel, does mall security carry radios? Yes, but most of the guards evacuated when the shooting started. I need a radio, and I need you to keep monitoring these cameras. Be my eyes up here. Miguel hesitated, then handed Alex a security radio. Alex, I don't know what you're thinking, but this isn't your job. You're an electrician. Alex clipped the radio to his belt and checked his tactical flashlight and trauma kit. For 20 years, he'd told himself that his military training was in the past, irrelevant to civilian life. But standing in the security office, looking at injured people who needed help that wasn't coming fast enough, he realized that some skills never really disappeared. They just waited. Miguel, there's something you should know about me. I wasn't always an electrician. Before Miguel could respond, Alex was moving, heading back toward the service corridors that would take him closer to the central court. Behind him, he could hear Miguel talking into his own radio, coordinating with the evacuation efforts Alex had initiated. The service route to the central court required Alex to move through areas of the mall he rarely visited. Storage rooms, mechanical spaces, and maintenance shafts that connected different levels of the building. As he moved, he could hear the sounds of evacuation above him. Footsteps, voices, the occasional sob of relief as people reached safety. His evacuation plan was working. People were getting out. But the injured in the central court were still trapped, and Alex was increasingly certain that professional help wouldn't arrive in time. The radio crackled with Miguel's voice. Alex, I can see you on camera 12. You're about 50 feet from the central court. The area looks clear right now, but be careful. Alex keyed the radio. How many injured do you count? 4 that I can see clearly, maybe more behind cover. Any sign of the shooters? Nothing for the past 5 minutes. They might have moved to a different area or... Miguel's voice trailed off. Or they might be waiting, Alex finished. It was a classic ambush tactic. Create casualties, then wait for rescue attempts to create more targets. Alex reached the final service door, the one that would put him in the central court area where the shooting had taken place. Through the small window, he could see the devastation. Overturned tables, scattered shopping bags, and motionless figures lying near the fountain that served as the mall's centerpiece. The elderly woman Miguel had mentioned was still there, barely visible behind a large planter. Alex could see that she was conscious, but unable or afraid to move. Near her, a younger man appeared to be injured, holding what looked like a makeshift bandage against his shoulder. Alex took a deep breath, remembering tactical principles he'd learned decades ago. Speed and surprise were better than caution when lives were at stake. Every minute he spent planning was another minute those people remained exposed. He opened the service door and stepped into the central court. The difference between the protected service corridors and the open mall area was stark. Here, the smell of fear and blood was immediately noticeable. The sounds of his footsteps echoed off the high ceiling, seeming impossibly loud despite his efforts to move quietly. Alex reached the elderly woman first, approaching from behind the planter to avoid exposing himself to potential sniper positions. "Ma'am," he said softly, "my name is Alex. I'm here to help. Are you injured?" The woman, probably in her 70s, well-dressed, clearly in shock, looked at him with eyes that struggled to focus. "I fell," she whispered. "When the shooting started, I fell. My ankle... I can't walk." Alex examined her ankle quickly. Sprained, possibly fractured, but not life-threatening. The woman was mobile with assistance. "I'm going to help you get to safety," Alex told her. "Can you put your arm around my shoulders?" As they began moving toward the nearest exit, Alex's radio crackled. "Alex, movement on camera 4. Someone in dark clothing heading toward your position." Alex felt his blood go cold. He was in the open, supporting an injured civilian, completely exposed. If one of the shooters was approaching, he had maybe seconds to react. "How far from cover?" he asked into the radio. 20 feet to the service door you came from." 20 feet, with an injured woman who could barely walk, against an armed opponent who was trained and mobile. Alex made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. Instead of trying to reach cover, he helped the elderly woman sit down behind the fountain's concrete base, the most substantial barrier in the immediate area. "Stay here," he told her. "Keep pressure on your ankle and don't move." Then Alex did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He began moving with the fluid, purposeful efficiency of someone trained for combat operations. Not running toward cover, but positioning himself strategically, using the mall's architecture to his advantage. The central court had multiple levels, with balconies and overhangs that created both opportunities and risks. Alex moved to a position where he could observe approaches while remaining partially concealed, the tactical flashlight in one hand and his radio in the other. "Miguel," he said quietly, "where's the movement now?" "Camera 6. He's about 50 feet from your position, moving slowly." "Alex, I think he's got a rifle." Alex felt the familiar calm that had once allowed him to function under extreme stress. His heartbeat slowed, his vision sharpened, and his mind began calculating angles, distances, and options with the precision that had once made him an effective military pilot. The difference was that this time he wasn't in command of a helicopter armed with sophisticated weapons. This time he was a 54-year-old electrician with a flashlight and a first aid kit, trying to protect injured civilians against an armed attacker. But some things didn't change. Training, experience, and the determination to ensure that good people made it home safely. Alex keyed his radio one more time. "Miguel, call 911 again. Tell them we have active shooter, multiple casualties, and that someone is attempting rescue operations. Give them my name, Alex Brennan, and tell them I'm former military." Then he switched off the radio and focused on the task at hand. The shooter appeared at the edge of the central court, moving with the careful precision of someone who knew he was entering a dangerous area. He was younger than Alex had expected, maybe 25, dressed in dark clothing, carrying what appeared to be a semi-automatic rifle. For a moment, the two men saw each other across 50 feet of open mall space. The shooter raised his weapon, and Alex dove behind the fountain's concrete base, rolling to position himself between the gunman and the injured civilians. The first shot shattered tile behind where Alex had been standing a second earlier. Alex had two advantages. He knew the mall's layout better than the shooter, and he had 20 years of tactical training. But the shooter had superior weapons and position. It wasn't much of an advantage, but it would have to be enough. The second shot ricocheted off the fountain's concrete edge, sending chips of masonry flying. Alex stayed low, his mind automatically calculating the shooter's position based on the sound of the gunfire. He was maybe 40 feet away, using the limited cover provided by decorative pillars in the central court. Alex looked at the elderly woman huddled beside him. She was conscious but terrified, her eyes wide with shock. Behind them, Alex could hear the wounded man near the planters, groaning softly. "Ma'am," Alex whispered, "I need you to stay exactly where you are. Don't move unless I tell you to." The woman nodded, gripping Alex's arm with surprising strength. Alex's radio, though switched off, was still receiving. He could hear Miguel's voice faintly. "Police ETA 8 minutes. Ambulance standing by. Alex, respond if you can hear this." 8 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. Alex assessed his tactical situation with the clarity that comes from training and desperation. The fountain provided good cover from the shooter's current position, but if the gunman moved to flank them, Alex would be caught in the open with no way to protect the injured civilians. The mall's central court was roughly circular, with multiple entrances and a high ceiling supported by decorative columns. The fountain sat in the center, surrounded by planters and seating areas that now served as cover for both predator and prey. Alex needed to change the dynamic of the encounter. As long as the shooter controlled mobility and positioning, Alex was simply delaying the inevitable. But if he could turn the situation into something other than a standoff? The shooter fired again, this time at the wounded man by the planters. The shot missed, but barely. Alex realized with growing urgency that the gunman was systematically targeting anyone he could see moving. Alex pulled out his tactical flashlight, a military-grade device designed to disorient as well as illuminate. It wasn't much of a weapon, but in the right circumstances, it could be tactically valuable. "Miguel?" Alex called out loudly, hoping his voice would carry to the security office. "Can you control the mall's lighting from up there?" The response came through his radio. "Yes, most of it. What do you need?" "On my signal, kill all the lights in the central court except the emergency systems." Alex didn't wait for a response. He was already moving, using the fountain's base to stay concealed while working his way toward the shooter's position. It was a calculated risk, getting closer to danger, but it was also the only way to change the tactical balance. The shooter seemed to realize that Alex was moving. Gunfire erupted, multiple shots hitting the concrete and tile near the fountain. But Alex was already committed to his plan. "Now, Miguel, cut the lights." The central court plunged into semi-darkness as the main lighting system shut down. Only emergency lighting remained, casting eerie shadows throughout the space. Alex immediately activated his tactical flashlight, but instead of using it to see, he aimed the powerful beam directly at where he estimated the shooter's position to be. The military-grade flashlight produced nearly 3,000 lumens of white light, enough to temporarily blind someone who had been adjusted to normal lighting conditions. Alex heard a curse from the shooter's direction, followed by wild gunfire as the man fired blind. Alex used the confusion to move closer, staying low and using the planters and seating areas for cover. His heart was pounding, but his mind remained clear. This was exactly the kind of situation he'd trained for 20 years ago, though he'd never imagined applying those skills as a civilian protecting other civilians. The shooter was trying to relocate, moving awkwardly in the dim lighting while dealing with flash blindness from Alex's tactical light. Alex could hear him stumbling into obstacles, knocking over trash cans and decorative displays. Alex reached a position maybe 20 feet from the shooter, close enough to attempt what he was planning, but also close enough that a single mistake would be fatal. He could see the gunman now, a young man who looked scared and disoriented, swinging his rifle in wide arcs as he tried to locate his target. Alex made his decision. Instead of trying to hide or wait for police, he called out to the shooter, "Put down your weapon! It's over!" The young man spun toward Alex's voice, raising his rifle, but Alex was already moving, using a combination of cover and darkness to stay one step ahead of the gunman's reactions. "You don't have to do this," Alex continued, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Nobody else needs to get hurt." "Shut up!" the shooter screamed back. "You don't know anything about what I have to do." Alex could hear pain and desperation in the young man's voice. This wasn't a hardened terrorist or professional criminal. This was someone who was probably as scared as the people he was terrorizing. "Talk to me," Alex called out. "Tell me what's wrong. Maybe we can figure this out." "It's too late. They destroyed my life. They took everything." The shooter fired several more rounds, but his shots were increasingly wild. Alex realized the young man was breaking down emotionally, which made him both less accurate and more unpredictable. "Who took everything?" Alex asked, genuinely trying to understand. "Who hurt you?" "The bank. The government. My family lost our farm because of them, and nobody cared. Nobody listened." Alex felt a stab of sympathy despite the circumstances. Financial desperation, family loss, institutional indifference, these were problems that drove people to extremes. But understanding the shooter's motivation didn't change the immediate tactical reality. "I'm listening now," Alex said. "Put down the gun and tell me about it." "No! You're just stalling until the police come." The young man was right, of course. Alex was trying to buy time while also looking for an opportunity to neutralize the threat without anyone else getting hurt. But he was also genuinely trying to reach someone who seemed more lost than evil. "The police are coming," Alex admitted. "But that doesn't mean this has to end badly. You haven't killed anyone yet. There's still time to make different choices." "I already made my choice." The shooter raised his rifle again, this time with more deliberate aim. Alex realized that the conversation phase of this encounter was over. The young man had made his decision, and Alex would have to make his. Alex had one advantage left: the element of surprise. The shooter expected him to keep hiding, to keep talking, to wait for professional help. Instead, Alex did something that 20 years of military training had taught him to do when all other options were exhausted. He attacked. Alex's tactical approach was based on surprise, speed, and the knowledge that hesitation would get people killed. He moved in a wide arc, using the mall's architectural features to stay concealed while closing distance with the shooter. The young gunman was focused on the area where Alex had been speaking from, expecting any movement to come from that direction. When Alex appeared from his flank, emerging from behind a large decorative column with his tactical flashlight blazing, the shooter was caught completely off guard. Alex had perhaps 3 seconds before the gunman could recover and bring his weapon to bear. 3 seconds to cover 20 feet of open ground and neutralize an armed opponent without getting shot himself. He used those seconds with the efficiency of someone who had trained for exactly this scenario, though he'd never imagined applying it in a shopping mall on a Saturday afternoon. The tackle was textbook, low, driving through the target, designed to disrupt the shooter's balance and weapon control rather than cause unnecessary injury. Alex and the young man went down hard, hitting the tile floor with enough force to knock the breath out of both of them. The rifle skittered away across the smooth floor, coming to rest near the fountain. For a moment, both men lay stunned, trying to recover from the impact. Alex recovered first, his military conditioning giving him the advantage in terms of physical resilience and tactical awareness. He rolled away from the shooter and came to his feet, positioning himself between the young man and the weapon. The shooter? Alex could see now that he was probably college-aged, thin and pale with the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't been sleeping or eating properly, struggled to sit up. "Stay down," Alex ordered, his voice carrying an authority that hadn't been there during his years as an electrician. "Don't make me hurt you." The young man looked at Alex with confusion and growing fear. "Who are you? You're not police." "No, I'm not." Alex kept his position between the shooter and the rifle, ready to react if the situation escalated again. "I'm just someone who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe the right place." In the distance, Alex could hear sirens approaching. The police response that had been delayed by other incidents was finally arriving, but there were still injured people in the central court who needed immediate medical attention. "Miguel," Alex spoke into his radio. "Situation secured. I need medical assistance for the injured civilians, and I need you to guide police to our location." "Alex, are you okay? We heard the struggle." "I'm fine. The shooter is disarmed and no longer a threat. But we've got people who need help. Alex looked down at the young gunman, who was now crying openly. The transformation from armed terrorist to frightened kid was jarring, a reminder that violence often grew from pain and desperation rather than pure evil. "What's your name?" Alex asked. "Marcus," the young man whispered. "Marcus Foster. Marcus, I need you to put your hands behind your back and lie face down. When the police get here, do exactly what they tell you to do. Don't give them any reason to use force." Marcus nodded, still crying, and followed Alex's instructions. The fight had gone out of him completely, replaced by exhaustion and what looked like relief that his violent episode was over. Alex quickly checked on the injured civilians. The elderly woman was shaken, but stable, her ankle injury painful, but not life-threatening. The man by the planters had a shoulder wound that was bleeding, but not arterial. He would need medical attention, but he wasn't in immediate danger of bleeding out. There was a third person Alex hadn't seen before, a middle-aged woman who appeared to have been knocked down during the initial panic. She was conscious but dazed, possibly suffering from a concussion. The sound of sirens was getting louder, and Alex could see flashing lights through the mall's main entrances. Dallas police, paramedics, probably FBI given the nature of the incident. A small army of professionals who would take over the scene and begin the long process of investigation, evidence collection, and trauma response. Alex's role was essentially over. He'd done what needed to be done, protected civilians, neutralized the threat, and ensured that nobody died while waiting for official help to arrive. In a few minutes, he would go back to being Alex Brennan the Electrician, leaving the heroics to others. But as he waited for the authorities to arrive, Alex realized that something fundamental had changed. For 20 years, he'd told himself that his military skills were irrelevant to civilian life, that the person he'd been before the tragic incident that ended his aviation career was gone forever. Today had proven otherwise. Captain Alexander Brennan, the man who'd once led helicopter missions in hostile territory, was still there. Buried under years of routine electrical work, but not erased. The first police officers entered the central court with weapons drawn, moving with the careful precision of professionals responding to an active shooter situation. Alex had already moved away from Marcus Foster and placed his hands in plain view, understanding that law enforcement would need to sort out who was who before anyone could be considered safe. "DPFD! Everyone stay where you are!" "My name is Alex Brennan," Alex called out clearly. "I'm a civilian who assisted in subduing the shooter. The suspect is on the ground with his hands behind his back. There are 3 injured civilians who need medical attention." The lead officer, a sergeant with graying hair and alert eyes, approached cautiously. "Sir, I need you to keep your hands visible and move away from all weapons and suspects." Alex complied, stepping back to give the police room to work. As paramedics rushed in to treat the injured, he found himself standing apart from the controlled chaos of the official response, watching professionals take over the scene he'd been managing for the past 30 minutes. Detective Linda Morrison arrived 20 minutes later, a tall woman in her 40s who carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen every kind of human behavior. She found Alex sitting on a bench outside the central court, giving his initial statement to a patrol officer. "Mr. Brennan, I'm Detective Morrison, Dallas Police. I understand you played a significant role in resolving this incident." "I did what needed to be done," Alex replied simply. Detective Morrison studied Alex with the calculating gaze of someone trained to read people and situations. "Officer Santos tells me you have detailed knowledge of this building's layout and security systems. You coordinated civilian evacuation efforts and ultimately subdued an armed suspect. That's not typical behavior for a civilian contractor." Alex met her gaze steadily. No, it's not. Would you mind explaining how an electrician came to have tactical training sufficient to handle an active shooter situation? It was the question Alex had been dreading and expecting since the moment he'd decided to take action. For 20 years, he'd hidden his military background, using it only to provide context-free expertise in his electrical work. Now that background was about to become public knowledge. Detective, I served 20 years in the United States Air Force. I was a helicopter pilot with extensive training in combat operations, search and rescue, and crisis management. Morrison made notes on her pad, but her expression didn't change. Why didn't you mention your military background initially? Because I left that life behind a long time ago. What happened here today? It was an exception, not a return to who I used to be. Mr. Brennan, 3 people are alive tonight because of your actions. A potentially catastrophic situation was resolved with minimal casualties. I'd say that's exactly who you used to be and probably still are. Alex didn't respond immediately. He was thinking about Sarah, who would see news coverage of the incident and realize that her father wasn't the simple electrician she'd known for the past 2 decades. He was thinking about the life he'd built in Dallas, the carefully constructed identity that had allowed him to find peace after his military career ended in tragedy. Detective, he said finally, I need to make some phone calls. My daughter, my customers, they're going to have questions about what happened here. Morrison nodded. We'll need a full statement, probably tomorrow when you've had time to process everything. But for now, you're free to go. And Mr. Brennan, thank you. What you did today made a difference. As Alex walked through the mall toward the parking lot, he passed clusters of people who'd been evacuated earlier. Some recognized him from news cameras that had filmed his emergence from the building. A few applauded. Others simply stared, trying to process the contrast between the ordinary-looking middle-aged man and the extraordinary actions he'd taken. Alex's phone had been buzzing with calls and messages throughout the police interview. Sarah had called 6 times. Local news stations had somehow gotten his number. His regular customers were checking to see if he was safe. He sat in his van in the mall parking lot, surrounded by emergency vehicles and news trucks, and returned his daughter's call first. Dad, I've been watching the news. They're saying you stopped a shooter, that you saved people? I'm okay, Sarah. That's the most important thing. Dad, the reporter said you were former military. Is that true? Were you a pilot before you became an electrician? Alex closed his eyes, knowing that this conversation would change their relationship forever. For better or worse, his carefully guarded secrets were now public knowledge. Yes, sweetheart. I was a pilot, a long time ago. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because that person, Captain Brennan, I thought he was gone. I thought I'd left him behind when I became your father's electrician. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Dad, I'm proud of you. For what you did today, and for being strong enough to build a new life when your old one ended. That takes courage too. After they hung up, Alex sat in his van for another hour, watching the organized chaos of the crime scene and thinking about the choices that had brought him to this moment. Tomorrow, there would be interviews, investigations, and probably media attention he didn't want. But tonight, 3 injured people would go home to their families instead of to the morgue. A young man named Marcus Foster would have the chance to get help for whatever pain had driven him to violence. And maybe, just maybe, Alex Brennan would figure out how to integrate the person he'd been with the person he'd become. The sun was setting behind the Dallas skyline as Alex finally started his van and headed home. In his rearview mirror, the mall remained busy with investigators and reporters, but the emergency was over. For the first time in 20 years, Captain Alexander Brennan had completed a successful mission. And this time, Everyone had made it home safely. The story broke on Sunday morning, spreading across local news stations before making its way to national media. Electrician's military past emerges in mall heroics was the headline in the Dallas Morning News, accompanied by photos of Alex taken during his Air Force service alongside current images from the mall incident. Alex woke up to find news vans parked outside his modest house in Oak Cliff. Reporters with microphones and camera crews were setting up on his front lawn, clearly prepared to wait as long as necessary for a statement from the reluctant hero. He made coffee and read the news coverage on his tablet, wincing at the details that had already become public. His military service record, partially declassified due to the public interest in yesterday's events, painted the picture of an accomplished pilot with numerous commendations and over 3,000 flight hours in combat zones. What the articles didn't explain was why Captain Alexander Brennan had left the Air Force 20 years ago and disappeared into civilian life as an electrician. That story, Alex realized, would eventually come out as well. Investigative reporters were already digging into his background, and it was only a matter of time before they uncovered the incident that had ended his military career. His phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he hadn't seen in 15 years. General Patricia Hayes, his former commanding officer, now retired and living in Colorado. Alex? Pat Hayes. I saw the news coverage. I wanted to check on you before this media circus gets completely out of hand. General Hayes. It's been a long time. Too long, and call me Pat. I've been retired for 5 years now. Alex, what you did yesterday? It was remarkable. But I'm worried about what's going to happen when reporters start digging into your Air Force record. Alex looked out his front window at the growing crowd of journalists. They're already digging, Pat. How long before they find out about Afghanistan? Probably not long. You know how these things go. Once there's public interest, classified information has a way of becoming less classified. Are you prepared for that? The question Alex had been dreading. For 20 years, he'd lived with the knowledge that his military career had ended in tragedy, that a single moment of crisis had cost lives and destroyed his ability to continue serving in the capacity he'd trained for. The official records would show the basic facts, but they wouldn't capture the full context of what had happened in those mountains 20 years ago. I don't know if anyone's ever prepared for that kind of scrutiny, Alex admitted. Alex, I want you to know that what happened in Afghanistan wasn't your fault. The investigation cleared you of any wrongdoing, and your actions probably saved more lives than were lost. You were dealt an impossible situation and made the best decisions anyone could have made. Tell that to the families of the Marines who died, Pat. I have talked to those families, Alex. Over the years, several of them reached out to me. They wanted to understand what happened, and when I explained the circumstances, they understood that you were a hero, not a villain in that story. Alex felt his throat tighten. He'd spent 2 decades believing that the families of those Marines blamed him for the incident that cost their sons' lives. Hearing otherwise, even secondhand, was emotionally overwhelming. The media is going to sensationalize it, Alex said. They'll turn it into a story about a disgraced pilot seeking redemption. Maybe. Or maybe they'll tell the truth about a good man who faced an impossible choice and then spent 20 years serving his community in a different way. You've been helping people all along, Alex. Yesterday wasn't redemption. It was just the most visible example of who you've always been. After they ended the call, Alex sat in his kitchen, staring out at the reporters who were clearly settling in for a long wait. He could avoid them for a while, but eventually he'd have to face the public attention and scrutiny that came with being labeled a hero. His phone buzzed with a text from Tom Rodriguez. Alex, saw the news. Mall management wants to offer you a reward for your actions yesterday. Also, We could use someone with your background in our security planning. Call me when you're ready to talk. Another message, this one from Miguel Santos. My friend, you saved my life and the lives of many others. My family wants to have you over for dinner when things calm down. Maria says she wants to meet the hero who's been fixing our lights all these years. Alex smiled despite the circumstances. These were the relationships that mattered. People who knew him as Alex the Electrician and appreciated both versions of his identity. But there was one call he needed to make. One person who deserved to hear the full story from him, rather than from news reports. Sarah answered on the first ring. Dad, are you okay? I saw the news trucks on TV. I'm fine, sweetheart, but there are some things about my military service that you need to know before you read about them in the newspapers. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Sarah, 20 years ago, I was involved in an incident in Afghanistan. We were on a rescue mission, trying to evacuate wounded Marines from a mountaintop under heavy enemy fire. The weather was terrible, visibility near zero, and the landing zone was under constant attack. Alex took a deep breath, preparing to tell the story he'd kept buried for 2 decades. I was the lead pilot for a 2-helicopter rescue operation. We managed to extract the wounded Marines, but during takeoff, my wingman's aircraft was hit by enemy fire. The helicopter crashed, killing the crew and the Marines they'd just rescued. Sarah was quiet, listening to her father's voice carry 20 years of pain and guilt. The investigation determined that I'd made the right tactical decisions given the information available at the time. But 8 good men died, and I was the mission commander. I couldn't continue flying after that. Every time I got in a cockpit, I saw their faces. Dad. So I left the Air Force and became an electrician. It was honest work, helpful work, and it didn't require making life or death decisions that could get people killed. For 20 years, I've been Alex Brennan the electrician, not Captain Alexander Brennan the pilot. And yesterday? Yesterday, I had to be both. The skills I learned as a pilot, tactical thinking, crisis management, the ability to function under pressure, those skills saved lives. But I also used the patience and problem-solving abilities I learned as an electrician. I needed both parts of who I am. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Dad, I love you. Both versions of you. The pilot who served his country and made hard decisions in impossible situations, and the electrician who spent 20 years helping people and being an amazing father. You don't have to choose between them anymore. After they ended the call, Alex felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. For the first time in 2 decades, he didn't feel like he was hiding from his past or ashamed of who he'd been. He looked out at the reporters waiting on his front lawn and made a decision that surprised him. He was going to go talk to them. Alex opened his front door and stepped onto the porch, immediately causing a flurry of activity as cameras focused and microphones were thrust in his direction. The questions came rapid fire. Mr. Brennan, how does it feel to be called a hero? Are you planning to return to military service? What made you decide to take action instead of waiting for police? Alex raised his hand, and the crowd gradually quieted. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured, the tone of someone who'd made peace with difficult truths. My name is Alex Brennan. I'm 54 years old, and I've been working as an electrician in Dallas for the past 15 years. Yesterday, I was at Westfield Mall doing routine electrical repairs when the shooting started. He paused, looking at the assembled reporters with steady eyes. 20 years ago, I served as a helicopter pilot in the United States Air Force. I completed multiple combat deployments and was involved in numerous rescue operations. My military career ended after an incident in Afghanistan, where 8 Marines died during a mission I was commanding. The investigation cleared me of wrongdoing, but I couldn't continue flying, knowing that my decisions, however justified, had contributed to the loss of life. The reporters were taking notes furiously, but they remained quiet, sensing that Alex was telling them something important. I became an electrician because I wanted to help people in a way that didn't involve life or death decisions. For 20 years, I've found satisfaction in solving problems, fixing things that were broken, and making sure people had the basic services they needed. Yesterday at the mall, I found myself in a situation where both sets of skills were necessary. My knowledge of the building's layout and electrical systems helped coordinate evacuations. My military training helped me assess the tactical situation and ultimately stop the shooter. But it was also my experience as an electrician, patience, methodical problem solving, and attention to detail that made the difference. A reporter from Channel 8 raised her hand. "Mr. Brennan, do you consider yourself a hero?" Alex thought about the question for a moment. "I consider myself someone who was in the right place, at the right time, with the right skills to help. The real heroes were the mall employees who stayed calm under pressure, the shoppers who helped each other reach safety, and the police and paramedics who responded professionally to a chaotic situation." What about Marcus Foster, the shooter? Do you have any thoughts about his motivations? Marcus Foster is a young man who was in tremendous pain and made terrible choices as a result. I hope he gets the help he needs to address whatever drove him to violence. I also hope this incident starts conversations about how we identify and support people who are struggling before they reach the point of harming others. The press conference continued for another 20 minutes, with Alex answering questions about the tactical details of the incident, his military background, and his plans for the future. When it was over, most of the media crews packed up and left, their immediate news needs satisfied. But Alex knew this was just the beginning. Over the next few days, there would be follow-up interviews, background pieces, and probably documentaries about the incident. His quiet life as an anonymous electrician was over, replaced by a public identity he hadn't sought, but would have to learn to manage. That evening, Alex received an unexpected visitor. General Patricia Hayes had flown in from Colorado and was standing on his front porch with a bottle of wine and a knowing smile. "Pat, what are you doing here?" "I came to check on an old friend who just had his life turned upside down by media attention. Also, I brought news that I thought you should hear in person." They sat in Alex's living room, drinking wine and catching up on 20 years of separate lives. General Hayes had had a distinguished post-military career in aerospace consulting. She'd married a fellow officer, raised 2 children, and stayed connected to the military community in ways that Alex had deliberately avoided. "Alex, there's something I need to tell you about the Afghanistan incident. Something that wasn't included in the official investigation reports." Alex felt his stomach tighten. What kind of something? 3 years after the incident, we captured the insurgent commander who'd planned the attack on that mountaintop. During his interrogation, he revealed that the operation was specifically designed to trap American rescue helicopters. They'd wounded the Marines as bait, then positioned heavy weapons to shoot down any aircraft that attempted evacuation. Pat leaned forward, her expression serious. "Alex, you walked into a carefully planned ambush. The fact that you managed to extract most of the wounded and only lost 1 aircraft was actually remarkable. Any other pilot might have lost both helicopters and all personnel involved." Alex stared at his wine glass, processing information that reframed 20 years of self-blame and guilt. Why wasn't this included in my investigation file? Because the intelligence came from classified interrogation techniques that couldn't be used in official reports. But Alex, the military leadership knew. We all knew that you'd performed exceptionally under impossible circumstances. Then why did they let me leave? Why didn't anyone tell me this? Pat's expression softened. Because you were determined to blame yourself, and we couldn't override your personal decision to leave the service. Sometimes the best officers are the ones who feel responsibility most deeply, even when logic says they shouldn't. They talked late into the evening, filling in decades of missing context and shared memories. As General Hayes prepared to leave, she handed Alex an envelope. One more thing. The Pentagon has been following your civilian career, not invasively, just keeping track of personnel who might be valuable in crisis situations. Yesterday's incident has generated significant interest in your combination of technical expertise and tactical experience. Alex opened the envelope and found a formal letter on Department of Defense letterhead. They're offering me a consultant position, emergency response planning, critical infrastructure protection, civilian evacuation procedures. The kind of work that combines your electrical expertise with your military background. It would be part-time, project-based, but it might give you a way to use both sides of your skill set. Alex read through the offer carefully. It was essentially what he'd been doing yesterday at the mall, but in a formal capacity with appropriate resources and authority. I don't know, Pat. I've built a good life here in Dallas. You could keep that life and expand it. Alex, yesterday proved that Captain Alexander Brennan and Alex Brennan the electrician aren't separate people. They're the same person with different applications of the same core values: helping others, solving problems, and taking responsibility for the welfare of people who depend on you. After Pat left, Alex sat in his living room, looking at the Pentagon offer and thinking about the path that had brought him to this moment. For 20 years, he'd believed that his military career had ended in failure, that the transition to civilian life was a retreat from meaningful service. Yesterday had shown him otherwise. The skills he'd developed as a pilot had saved lives, but so had the knowledge he'd gained as an electrician. The man who'd fixed broken electrical systems for 15 years was the same man who'd fixed a broken situation at the mall when professional help wasn't immediately available. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Dad, I've been thinking about our conversation today. I'm proud of both versions of you, and I think it's time you were too. Love you. Alex smiled and picked up the Pentagon letter. He had a lot to consider, but for the first time in 20 years, he was considering it as a complete person rather than someone running from his past. Outside, Dallas sparkled in the evening darkness, a city of millions of people who depended on infrastructure and services and the quiet competence of people like Alex Brennan. Tomorrow, he would go back to work, maybe as an electrician, maybe as something more, but definitely as someone who was no longer hiding from who he'd always been. The silent current of his life was about to become much more visible, and Alex was finally ready for that change. On a Thursday morning in December, Alex was conducting a security assessment at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Jennifer Foster. Mr. Brennan, this is Dr. Foster, a psychiatrist at Dallas County Mental Health. I'm calling about Marcus Foster. Alex felt a complex mixture of emotions at the mention of the young man who'd been the Westfield shooter. How is he doing? That's what I wanted to discuss with you. Marcus has made significant progress in treatment over the past few months. He's been dealing with depression and PTSD related to his family's financial losses, and he's expressed interest in speaking with you, if you're willing. Alex had wondered about Marcus often since the incident. The media coverage had revealed a tragic background: a family farm lost to foreclosure, parents who'd committed suicide, a young man who'd felt abandoned by the institutions he'd trusted to provide stability and justice. What kind of conversation are we talking about, Doctor? Foster? Marcus wants to apologize to you personally, and he's also interested in understanding how you were able to remain calm and compassionate during the incident. He's been working on anger management and developing better coping strategies. Meeting with you might be part of his healing process. Alex agreed to the meeting, which took place the following week at the mental health facility where Marcus was receiving treatment. The young man Alex encountered was dramatically different from the desperate, violent person he'd subdued at the mall. Marcus was clean-shaven, alert, and clearly healthier than he'd been 3 months earlier. When he saw Alex, tears immediately began flowing. "Mr. Brennan, I don't know how to apologize for what I did. I could have killed you, killed innocent people who were just shopping with their families." Alex sat down across from Marcus in the facility's comfortable meeting room. "Marcus, you were in pain, and you made terrible choices because of that pain. But you didn't kill anyone, and you're getting help now. That's what matters. I keep thinking about how you talked to me during the incident. Even when I was threatening you with a rifle, you treated me like a human being. You tried to understand what was wrong instead of just stopping me." Alex thought about that day, remembering the fear and desperation he'd heard in Marcus's voice, even as the young man was pointing a weapon at him. "Marcus, I saw someone who was hurting. Yes, you were dangerous, and I had to stop you from harming innocent people. But I also saw someone who needed help, not just punishment." They talked for an hour, with Dr. Foster facilitating the conversation and helping both men process the complex emotions surrounding their encounter. Marcus explained the financial devastation that had destroyed his family, the sense of helplessness and rage that had built up over months of unsuccessful attempts to find help through legal channels. "I felt like the system had abandoned us," Marcus said. "My parents worked that farm for 30 years, and when the bank foreclosed, nobody cared. Nobody listened. I started thinking that violence was the only way to make people pay attention." "But it's not," Alex replied. "Violence just creates more pain, more problems. There are other ways to fight injustice, other ways to make your voice heard." Dr. Foster had been working with Marcus on exactly those alternatives. Advocacy organizations, legal aid societies, community organizing efforts that channeled anger into constructive action rather than destructive violence. Marcus has applied to volunteer with a nonprofit that helps families facing foreclosure, Dr. Foster explained. He wants to use his experience to help others navigate the legal and financial systems that he felt had failed his family. As Alex left the mental health facility, he reflected on the complexity of justice and healing. Marcus Foster had terrorized innocent people and could have caused multiple deaths. But he was also a victim of circumstances beyond his control, someone who'd been failed by systems that were supposed to provide security and fairness. The work Alex was doing with Homeland Security increasingly focused on these kinds of systemic issues. How to identify potential threats before they became violent. How to build resilient communities that could respond effectively to crises. How to address root causes of instability rather than just responding to symptoms. His phone rang as he drove home from the meeting. Sarah's name on the display. "Dad, I have news. I'm getting married." Alex pulled over to the side of the road, needing to focus completely on his daughter's excited voice. "David proposed last night. We're thinking about a spring wedding, maybe here in Seattle, but we want you to be involved in all the planning." "Sarah, that's wonderful news. I'm so happy for you." "Dad, there's something else. David and I have been talking about moving to Dallas. His company has an office there, and after everything that's happened this year, well, I want to be closer to you. I want my children to know their grandfather." Alex felt tears starting to form. For 20 years, he'd believed that his choices, leaving the military, becoming an electrician, maintaining distance from his past, had somehow diminished him as a father. Sarah's decision to move closer suggested otherwise. "I would love that, sweetheart. There's so much I want to show you about Dallas, about the life I've built here. They talked for another 20 minutes about wedding plans, career moves, and the future that was taking shape for both of them. When they ended the call, Alex sat in his parked car, watching Dallas traffic flow past and thinking about the unexpected ways that life could change direction. 6 months ago, he'd been Alex Brennan the electrician, known to a small circle of customers and neighbors, but invisible to the wider world. The Westfield incident had changed that, forcing him to integrate the different aspects of his identity and creating opportunities he'd never imagined. But more importantly, it had taught him that the skills and values that defined him couldn't be compartmentalized. The military officer who'd learned to make difficult decisions under pressure was the same person who'd spent 15 years solving electrical problems with patience and precision. The father who'd rebuilt his life after personal tragedy was the same man who'd risked everything to protect strangers in a shopping mall. Alex started his van and headed home, planning to spend the evening updating his business website. Brennan Electric Services was expanding again, taking on larger commercial projects that required both technical expertise and security planning. His military background, once something he'd hidden, was now a selling point for clients who wanted contractors they could trust with sensitive installations. He also needed to prepare for a trip to Chicago the following week, where he'd be consulting with city planners on evacuation procedures for high-rise buildings. It was work that combined electrical systems knowledge with tactical planning, exactly the kind of interdisciplinary problem-solving that Alex found most satisfying. As he drove through Oak Cliff, past the houses where he'd installed ceiling fans and rewired electrical panels for dozens of families over the years, Alex realized that his story wasn't really about heroism or redemption. It was about integration, learning to be a complete person rather than hiding parts of himself that seemed incompatible. The evening news was covering another story about community response to crisis, this one involving a volunteer search and rescue team that had found a lost hiker in the mountains outside Denver. Alex watched the coverage while eating dinner, noting the coordination between professional emergency responders and civilian volunteers, the way that different skill sets combined to solve complex problems. His phone buzzed with an email from the Pentagon. Mr. Brennan, we have a new project that might interest you. Urban Disaster Preparedness Assessment for Major Metropolitan Areas. Timeline, 18 months. Compensation competitive. Are you available for a briefing next week? Alex read the email twice, then looked around his living room at the life he'd built as a civilian electrician. Photos of Sarah at various ages, certificates from electrical contracting organizations, a shelf of technical manuals that represented 15 years of learning and problem-solving. He wasn't abandoning any of that. He was adding to it, creating a career that honored both his military service and his civilian expertise. Alex typed his response. Available for briefing. Looking forward to learning more about the project. Then he called Sarah to tell her about the new opportunity, about the work he was doing that combined technical skills with emergency planning, about the life he was building that felt complete for the first time in 20 years. 1 year after the Westfield Mall incident, Alex stood at a podium in the same central court where he'd confronted Marcus Foster. But instead of chaos and gunfire, the space was filled with folding chairs and a crowd of people gathered for a very different kind of event. The mall management, in partnership with Dallas County Mental Health Services, had organized a community forum on crisis prevention and response. Alex had been asked to speak about his experience, but more importantly, to help launch a new program that addressed some of the underlying issues that contributed to violent incidents. A year ago, Alex began, speaking to an audience that included mall employees, local residents, mental health professionals, and law enforcement officers. This space was the scene of a tragic incident that could have been much worse. Today, We're here to talk about how communities can work together to prevent such incidents and respond effectively when crises do occur. In the front row, Marcus Foster sat with Dr. Foster and his victim advocate. Marcus was now 18 months into his treatment program and had become an advocate for mental health services and economic justice. His presence at the forum was part of his ongoing effort to make amends for his actions, while also working to address the systemic issues that had contributed to his crisis. The most important lesson from that day, Alex continued, is that crisis response isn't just about what happens during an emergency. It's about the work we do every day to build resilient communities, support people who are struggling, and create systems that help rather than abandon those in need. Alex's presentation covered the technical aspects of emergency preparedness, evacuation routes, communication systems, coordination between different agencies. But he spent equal time discussing community mental health resources, economic support programs, and early intervention strategies that could identify people in crisis before they reached the point of violence. The forum included workshops on de-escalation techniques, financial counseling resources, and mental health first aid. Local organizations set up information booths offering services ranging from job training to family counseling to legal aid for people facing foreclosure. During the lunch break, Alex was approached by Detective Linda Morrison, who had investigated the original incident. "Alex, I wanted you to know that this forum has generated more community engagement than anything we've done in my 15 years with the department. People are actually talking to each other about problems before they become crimes." "That's the goal," Alex replied. "Yesterday's crisis could become tomorrow's prevention success story." Dr. Foster joined their conversation. "Alex, Marcus wanted me to tell you that he's been accepted into a community college program for social work. He wants to help other young people who are facing the kind of difficulties that led to his breakdown." "How's he doing with that?" "Better than anyone expected. He's found purpose in helping others, and he's developed coping strategies that allow him to channel his anger into productive advocacy work." Later that afternoon, Alex participated in a panel discussion with Miguel Santos, who had been promoted to head of mall security, and Jennifer Cross, the emergency room physician who'd treated the victims from the incident. The topic was learning from crisis, individual, and institutional responses. "The thing about Alex," Miguel told the audience, "is that he was helping people long before he became famous for stopping a shooter. For 15 years, he's been the guy who shows up when your power goes out, who explains complex electrical problems in terms you can understand, who treats every customer with respect regardless of how much money they have." That consistency of character, Dr. Cross added, is what allowed him to function effectively under extreme pressure. Crisis response isn't about becoming a different person. It's about being the best version of who you already are. Alex found himself thinking about that observation as he drove home from the forum. He'd spent 20 years believing that Captain Alexander Brennan and Alex Brennan the Electrician were separate identities, one representing failure and retreat, the other representing modest success and safety. But the past year had taught him otherwise. Both versions of himself were expressions of the same core values: competence, service to others, and responsibility for community welfare. The skills were different, but the underlying character was consistent. His phone rang as he pulled into his driveway. Sarah's name on the display. She and David had moved to Dallas 6 months earlier and were now living in a house Alex had helped them find and had rewired to accommodate David's home office. "Dad, can you come over for dinner tonight? David's parents are visiting, and they want to meet the famous grandfather-to-be." Alex smiled. Sarah was 4 months pregnant with his first grandchild, a development that had added new dimension to his sense of purpose and continuity. "I'll be there. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself. And maybe some of those stories about your consulting work. David's father is an engineer. and he's fascinated by your infrastructure security projects. The dinner conversation was lively, ranging from technical discussions of electrical grid vulnerabilities to family stories about Sarah's childhood in Dallas. David's parents, both retired professionals from Seattle, had been initially skeptical about their son's decision to relocate to Texas, but they'd been won over by Alex's warmth and the obvious happiness of the young couple. "Sarah tells us you're working on a book," David's mother mentioned as they cleared the dinner dishes. "A technical manual, really. The Department of Homeland Security asked me to compile best practices for civilian contractors working on critical infrastructure security. It's not exactly bestseller material, but it might help other people who find themselves bridging the gap between technical expertise and emergency planning." "It sounds important," she replied. "These days, everyone needs to understand how communities can become more resilient." After David's parents returned to their hotel, Alex stayed to help with kitchen cleanup and to spend time with Sarah. They sat on the back porch, watching the Dallas skyline light up as evening settled over the city. "Dad," Sarah said, her hand resting on her growing belly. "I've been thinking about what I want this baby to know about their grandfather. Not just the hero story that made the news, but the real story of who you are." "What story is that?" "The story of someone who faced tragedy and loss, who made mistakes and carried guilt, but who never stopped trying to help other people. The story of someone who built a new life without forgetting the lessons of his old one." Alex felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came with his daughter's insights into his character. "That's a story I'm still writing, sweetheart." "I know. And I want this baby to grow up understanding that's what good people do. They keep writing their story, keep learning, keep serving others regardless of what setbacks they face." As Alex drove home through Oak Cliff, past the houses where he'd done electrical work for families who'd become friends, he reflected on the unexpected trajectory his life had taken. A year ago, he'd been content with invisibility, with the quiet satisfaction of technical work well done. Now he was part of a national conversation about community resilience, infrastructure security, and crisis prevention. His consulting work took him to cities across the country, where he helped develop evacuation plans, communication systems, and training programs that could save lives during emergencies. But more importantly, he'd learned to integrate all aspects of his identity into a coherent whole. The military officer, the civilian electrician, the father, the community member, all were expressions of the same fundamental commitment to competence and service. Alex's phone buzzed with a text from Tom Rodriguez. "Alex, got a call from the airport. They want you to consult on a major electrical upgrade project with security implications. Interested?" Alex smiled and typed back, "Send me the details." Always interested in work that combines electrical systems with safety planning. Then he added, "By the way, thanks for believing in me during all those years when I was just fixing lights and outlets. That support meant more than you knew." As he pulled into his driveway, Alex could see lights on in houses throughout the neighborhood, families settling in for the evening, children doing homework, parents planning for tomorrow. All of it depending on the invisible infrastructure that people like Alex maintained and protected. It was honest work, important work, and work that connected him to a community of people who mattered. The recognition and expanded opportunities that had come from the Westfield incident were gratifying, but they weren't the source of his satisfaction. That came from the simpler knowledge that he was using his skills, all of them, to serve others effectively, whether that meant rewiring a kitchen, coordinating an evacuation plan, or helping a young man like Marcus Foster find constructive outlets for his anger and pain. Alex Brennan's story wasn't about redemption or heroism. It was about integration, consistency, and the quiet satisfaction of work well done in service of others. And tomorrow, there would be more work to do. 5 years after the Westfield Mall incident, Alex Brennan stood in the control room of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, overseeing the final testing of a new emergency communication system he'd helped design. The system integrated electrical infrastructure with security protocols, allowing coordinated response to various crisis scenarios. At 59, Alex had found a career that perfectly balanced his technical expertise with his tactical experience. His consulting firm, Brennan Security Systems, employed 12 people and worked on projects across the United States, designing resilient infrastructure for airports, shopping centers, hospitals, and schools. But he still kept his electrical contracting license current, still took residential service calls, still maintained the personal relationships that had sustained him through decades of quiet work in Dallas neighborhoods. His granddaughter Emma was now 4 years old, a curious child who loved visiting Grandpa Alex's office and asking endless questions about how electrical systems worked. Sarah often joked that Emma had inherited the family engineering gene, along with Alex's methodical approach to problem solving. Marcus Foster, now 26, had graduated from college with a degree in social work and was employed by Dallas County Mental Health Services, specializing in crisis intervention and community outreach. He and Alex maintained a friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to preventing the kind of circumstances that had led to their violent encounter years earlier. The Westfield Mall had been renovated and expanded, with new security systems that reflected lessons learned from the 2019 incident. A small memorial plaque near the fountain acknowledged the lives that had been affected that day, but also celebrated the community response and recovery efforts that had followed. Alex's book, Infrastructure Resilience: Technical and Human Factors in Crisis Response, had become required reading in emergency management programs at several universities. It was, as he'd predicted, not bestseller material, but it was influential among the professionals who planned for and responded to community crises. On this particular Thursday evening, Alex was reviewing plans for a new project, a comprehensive security assessment for the Texas State Fair, when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Dallas Emergency Management. "Alex, this is Director Williams. We've got a situation developing at the convention center, multiple injuries from a structural collapse, and we need someone who understands both the electrical systems and emergency evacuation procedures. Can you respond?" Alex was already reaching for his toolkit and tactical equipment, items he now carried routinely, not out of paranoia, but out of professional preparedness. "On my way. What's the preliminary assessment?" "Partial ceiling collapse in the main exhibition hall. About 300 people in the building, approximately 20 injured, some trapped. We need to coordinate power shutdown for safety while maintaining emergency lighting for evacuation." Alex felt the familiar clarity that came with crisis situations, the integration of technical knowledge and tactical thinking that had served him well for 5 years of consulting work and 24 years of military and civilian service. "Director Williams, I'll be there in 15 minutes. Have building management meet me at the electrical distribution center and coordinate with incident command to establish communication protocols." As Alex drove toward downtown Dallas, emergency lights flashing in his rearview mirror, he thought about the chain of events that had brought him to this point. A single moment of decision in a shopping mall had revealed capabilities he'd thought were permanently buried, leading to a career that honored both his technical skills and his tactical experience. But more than that, it had taught him that service to others was the common thread connecting all aspects of his life. Military pilot, civilian electrician, emergency consultant, father, grandfather, community member. The methods changed, but the underlying purpose remained constant. Alex arrived at the convention center to find controlled chaos. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, and crowds of people being evacuated from the building. He parked near the incident command post and approached the senior officer coordinating the response. Alex Brennan, emergency systems consultant. I understand you need electrical assessment and evacuation coordination. Thank God you're here. We've got live wires down in the collapse area, emergency lighting is failing, and we're having trouble getting accurate information about how many people are still inside. Alex spent the next 6 hours coordinating utility shutdowns, emergency lighting deployment, and communication systems that allowed rescue teams to locate and extract trapped individuals. His combination of electrical expertise and crisis management experience proved essential in preventing additional injuries and ensuring systematic evacuation of all building occupants. By midnight, the immediate emergency was over. 23 people had been hospitalized with various injuries, but no one had died. The structural collapse caused by inadequate support for a new display installation would require months of investigation and repair, but the human cost had been minimized through effective emergency response. As Alex packed his equipment, he was approached by a young woman in a firefighter's uniform. Mr. Brennan, I'm Lieutenant Rodriguez, Dallas Fire Department. I wanted to thank you for your work tonight. The coordination between electrical safety and rescue operations made all the difference. Alex looked at the woman's name tag and felt a spark of recognition. Rodriguez, are you related to Maria Rodriguez? She's my older sister. She talks about you all the time. Says you're the guy who fixed our family's electrical problems for years and then became famous for stopping a shooter. Alex smiled, remembering the little girl who'd helped her father Miguel Santos at the mall during school breaks, who'd wanted to be an engineer like her grandfather. Your sister's a remarkable young woman. I'm glad she found a career where she can help people. She says she learned about service by watching people like you, people who do their jobs well without needing recognition, who step up when others need help. As Alex drove home through the early morning darkness, he thought about legacy and influence, about the ways that consistent character and competent service created ripple effects that extended far beyond immediate circumstances. Emma would grow up in a world where her grandfather was known for both electrical expertise and crisis management, where technical competence and community service were seen as complementary rather than separate values. Marcus Foster would continue his work with troubled young people, carrying forward lessons about channeling anger into productive advocacy and finding purpose through service to others. The professionals who read his book would apply principles of infrastructure resilience to their own communities, creating systems that could respond effectively to various emergency scenarios. But perhaps most importantly, the hundreds of families who had employed Brennan Electric services over the years had learned that competence, integrity, and service were values worth exemplifying in their own lives and careers. Alex pulled into his driveway as the sun rose over Dallas, ending another night of crisis response and community service. In a few hours, he would have breakfast with Sarah and Emma, would review plans for the State Fair security project, would return phone calls from customers who needed routine electrical work. It was a life that integrated all aspects of his identity and experience, a career that honored both his military service and his civilian expertise, a legacy that was measured not in headlines or recognition, but in the quiet satisfaction of problems solved and people helped. The current that had always defined Alex Brennan, the steady flow of competence, service, and responsibility, continued to power not just electrical systems, but the human connections that made communities resilient. And there was still more work to be done. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most, and where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.